Thanks to those of you who made it safely back from the coffee break. I realize it's late in the afternoon and these sessions are never easy. Thank you, Luca, for the kind introduction and for the invitation. I'll be honest with you, I'm slightly uncomfortable with this presentation because generally speaking, a big part of my job is kind of opening speeches, keynote talks, where I give a very high-level message about how wonderful district heating can be. And what's being asked of me today is to talk about a lot of technical aspects of how it can be improved and so on. I don't propose to do that, not least because I've heard at least 50 technical experts through today who are infinitely better qualified than I am to do so. So instead, I will talk about things as I experience them in Brussels and my sense about where this industry is going, particularly in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. So as Luca said, Euroheat and Power is the representative organization for the district heating and cooling business in Brussels. So our first job is to speak on behalf of the industry to decision makers at the level of the European Union about policy frameworks that would be required to help further both the growth and the improvement, crucially, of district heating networks. Another big part of my job is to talk to the industry about what's happening in Europe, what the general tendencies are with this business and the wider energy sector, and the implications that all that might have for district heating and cooling network operators. Okay. The first time I was approached about working in this business was 8 or 9 years ago now, when I had a call from a large Danish company called Voss asking if I wanted to represent them on matters related to district energy. My first response was no, thank you. And why? Not because I didn't want to work at Voss, but because the preconceptions that I had about district heating were overwhelmingly negative, if I'm honest. So the little that I knew about the business was that it was coal-based, perhaps gas-based, and full of inefficient networks, full of systems that you couldn't control properly, situations where you needed to open the windows in order to cool the room down. And that was not a huge attraction to me. And it's only because Danfoss was kind enough to persist a little bit that I ended up taking the time to go to Denmark and shut up and listen a little bit and learn something about what this sector can be when it's done properly. But again, if I'm honest, my first thought when district heating was mentioned to me 8 long years ago was probably something like this. And of course the question there is, what do you see? You can see a problem. You can see a very old-fashioned piece of technology, an old-fashioned way of doing things, and you can think, well, maybe this is something we need to get rid of. My job is to try and help people in Brussels and everywhere else understand that it can be so much more than this, and that actually this is a picture of a strategic asset waiting to be rediscovered, repurposed, reinvented, and something that can be not a regret, not an unfortunate vestige of the past, but something that can help Serbia and every other country in Europe to have an easier journey to a decarbonized, cleaner, more efficient energy system. Now, when we talk about what district heating can and should be, it looks something like this, and we made a little movie, and I think it'll play.
Mummy, does Google know what the world will be like in 100 years?
I'm afraid not even Google can answer that question. It's up to us. The climate crisis may be a global problem, but the best solutions often turn out to be local. And since more and more of us are moving to cities, this is where the bulk of the work needs to be done. Roughly 75% of Europeans live in cities. They account for most of our CO2 emissions and most of our energy consumption. And the biggest share of that consumption is for heating and cooling. That means finding ways to deliver sustainable and affordable heating and cooling to our cities is much more than a nice to have. It's a must. The good news is district heating and cooling networks can help. They use water, heated or cooled from a central source to keep our buildings comfortable. They've been around for over a century, but our grandparents' district heating network won't be enough to meet the climate and energy challenges of the 21st century. Our cities need something newer, something better. And it's coming. The energy we need to heat and cool our cities is usually a lot closer at hand than we might imagine. Modern thermal networks bring this concept to life, harvesting heat or cold from a wide range of sources, including the sun, the earth, the sea, industrial processes, data centers, and even our metro stations and sewage systems. They also work together with the electricity grid, providing cheap storage and a new route to market for renewable electricity and gas. By harnessing the power of data and artificial intelligence, the new generation of district heating grids are more flexible and efficient, providing customers with a first-class user experience and contributing to the emergence of greener, smarter, and more cost-effective energy system. The decisions we make today will determine the kind of world we'll be living in tomorrow. That's why the European district heating and cooling industry is committed to fully decarbonising our networks before 2050. We owe it to our communities, to our customers, and to our children. Heat networks won't save the world on their own, but they can help. One day, one building, one city at a time.
That's very kind. Okay, but I think it's important that we have somewhere in one single place a simple overview of the story that we like to tell about this business. Now, when I talk to decision makers in Brussels about this, one of the things that quickly comes up is, well, that's all fine in Denmark or in Sweden, but I'm from country X, and there my grandmother is connected to district heating and it doesn't work very well, and so on and so on and so on. And so one of the things that we have to do first as an industry is confront that truth, and that can be the case with some networks in some places. And second, start thinking about what to do about it. And as it turns out, there's all kinds of things that can be done about it. And again, I'm hesitant to explain this to an audience who's perfectly familiar with it. But there is so much that can be done to upgrade the performance of these networks by investing in better pipes, by looking at the sources that go into these networks, by taking advantage of digitalization and all that it offers to improve efficiency and intelligence of the network. By thinking about the connection between the district heating network and the wider energy system, the electricity grid, even the gas grid, and so on. So, in principle, there's an enormous amount to be done, and we, as Euroheat and Power, are involved in a number of European Union-funded projects to help explore these things, not in principle, but in practice. Now, what I do not propose to do is go through these projects one at a time, not least because someone in my team put them here and I'm less familiar with them than many of you will be. But again, what I want to get at is that these old networks, which may have been there for 50 years, really can be reinvented, repurposed, and be made part of every country in Europe's journey towards a clean energy system. Some of that will involve biomass. So we have a number of cases across the Baltics and here in this part of Europe where we've seen coal or natural gas being replaced by biomass. That tends to lead to instant reductions in the CO2 profile of the network. I would caution, as we heard this morning, that there are, I think, open and important discussions about the long-term prospects for biomass in district heating. I think there will be discussions about the assumptions used to calculate the carbon footprint. I think there will be important discussions about the allocation of bioresources in the future and whether burning them in boilers is going to be an acceptable use of them in 2040, 2050. And I can tell you already that from my colleagues in the Nordic region of Europe, they are already talking about biomass, upon which they rely heavily for the moment, as a transitional source for district heating, which opens a second discussion about what comes beyond biomass as a transition. Deep geothermal is certainly one of the leading candidates to take its place, but of course there's a lot to be done in terms of exploration of the geological situation and of the financial models to make that happen. More business, yeah. Huge solar thermal plant in Latvia, which opened just 2-3 months ago, which has seen fossil fuels, I think, down to the very last percentage point, removed from the system and replaced with what is obviously a clean alternative, and done in a cost-effective way that the local mayor is extremely happy with. Similarly, even in the farthest reaches of Russia, we see the same thing, where solar thermal has emerged as a viable alternative and has taken the place of fossil fuels in the network. And these were indeed old networks, very much conventional district heating networks, which were simply reinvented. Geothermal. I think this one was presented earlier this afternoon, but we have geothermal, particularly in Hungary, also in Bavaria and Germany. So much depends on the local conditions. But I know that the city of Munich, for example, is aiming for, by 2040, a district heating network which is entirely fueled by geothermal heat. So these things can be done, and they bring not only energy savings, but a dramatic reduction in CO2 emissions, and obviously also, importantly, an improvement in air quality, which is a matter of great concern to local citizens, and I can tell you from my discussions with cities to mayors. And more geothermal in Hungary. Congratulations to Hungary for its fantastic geology. It really is something. In addition to Upgrade DH, which is one of the programs that we're very involved with at Euroheat, there's another one called Keep Warm, which is specifically focused on the rehabilitation of district heating and cooling networks. So for those of you who are interested, and for those of you who are struggling with this at a local level, please do reach out to these people, either directly or through us, if it helps, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, the question of how do you take an old fossil-based district heating system and transform it into an efficient green-based system is already being addressed again and again and again by different people around Europe. So rather than considering this problem from scratch every time in isolation, let's discuss it and share experiences and knowledge, because a lot of the answers are already out there. Yeah, well, look, there's more from Croatia. These are examples of projects run through Keep Warm. There's another one in the Ukraine, but the Cyrillic is challenging for me. What I really want to get at, and this is our program, Upgrade DH. So again, it's the same thing. There's a handbook available on the website, which is a couple of 100 pages long, which I just about made my way through on the plane here. It's amazing, actually, because all these things are being looked at by people, and so really there's a whole community out there answering this very question. And I would encourage you to reach out to them through us to see what you can learn from it. What I'd like to talk about is my own set of ideas about what's needed policy-wise to make all this possible. Because my job, I spend my time in Brussels dealing with policy frameworks, legal frameworks that are needed in order to incentivize and drive this change. These are some of the things, the ingredients that are needed to make this happen. The first is, first of all, at European level, and this we more or less have now, but second, at national level, there does need to be some kind of heating and cooling strategy. Heating and cooling is typically about half of the energy used in a given country, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's too important to be treated as a niche subject, but it is often overlooked in favor of discussions about electricity. So any government that wants to see this happen in their country needs to take a certain amount of ownership of the problem and establish some kind of vision and certainty and clarity of purpose over where they want to see the heating and cooling market in their country go over the next 20, 30 years. Second, empower your cities. So we talk a lot about European legal frameworks, about national legal frameworks, and their necessary preconditions, but none of this happens without active, engaged, passionate city leaders. District heating, for all its European dimensions, is an inherently local business, and it needs a champion at local level, a mayor or a deputy mayor or whatever it is, who believes in the project and is ready to put not only the financial resources but the political capital into the project to see it develop. Start investing and stop spending. I mean, this is a simple concept. One of the objections that I hear to the development of district heating networks is, of course, that it's very capex heavy. You're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about significant costs, you're talking about a long-term plan. But obviously, when you make the analysis of the financial viability of a project like this, you do need to consider what you get in return for that investment. So when you build that infrastructure, you're suddenly in a position to start using readily available local heat resources like waste heat from industry, like local biomass that might be there in your community, like the sun or even the wind, and stop spending money on importing more and more oil and gas from the far corners of the earth. Internalize your external costs. So I hear a lot that gas is cheap, and that we can't build district heating because gas is so cheap. But gas is only cheap, and coal is only cheap, if you don't take much account of their true costs, if you don't integrate their environmental impacts into your cost assumptions. When you start to do that, when you find a way to put an appropriate price on the CO2 emissions, on the pollutant emissions, then the business case for district heating starts to improve significantly. Look beyond the building. So one of the questions that you hear from Danish people when we have these kinds of discussions all the time is, does my building have a neighbor? And too often I see buildings policy, building-related legislation, energy performance of buildings legislation, which focuses exclusively on individual buildings and treats them in isolation. And the prescribed actions that you might recommend for an individual building are not the same as those that you come to when you start considering a set of buildings or a district or even a city. And building policies which look exclusively at individual buildings and treat them in isolation tend to miss the point and tend to lead decision makers to suboptimal conclusions. Look beyond your network. So we heard a little bit about this morning. I'm not sure if everybody was there, but one of the big tendencies that we see, particularly in Northern Europe at the moment, is trying to find ways to integrate electric networks with thermal ones, whereby excess wind energy is used to power, say, a large heat pump, which in turn feeds the district heating network, which helps increase the penetration levels for renewable power, helps lower the CO2 footprint of the heat network, and helps the whole system function more efficiently. This works. And in areas where you have district heating infrastructure and wind power, it's something that needs to be carefully considered, and it is something that is emerging as a major theme for the policy of the incoming European Commission, and something we'll be hearing a lot more about. Ask for help. As I said, there are so many different people around Europe looking at this very specific problem right now. Nobody needs to feel that they are confronting this for the first time. There's all kinds of support out there for you, and my organization is only one of the places where you can look to find it, but we're more than happy to act as a hub and help you connect with other people who are dealing with this as well. And finally, where you have a district heating network, I would really encourage you to think of it not as a problem, not as something to be replaced by something new, but as really a strategic asset that is just waiting for you to rediscover it and make the most of its potential. These networks can help. And what I've seen in some countries, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, is a rush to replace them with what is an ostensibly more modern alternative, let's say an individual gas boiler. And 8-10 years later, when the country is a little bit further on with its thinking about the energy transition, it can happen that they suddenly realize that actually they had the thermal infrastructure that they would have needed, and now need to start from scratch and build it up again. So I would just encourage anyone who's dealing with this right now to take a second look at district heating, because it can be far more than it might appear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Is there any question from the audience? There is one question. Yes, please, the gentleman. There is a microphone available around.
Otherwise, you can shout at me.
It's coming, it's coming.
It's coming.
Hello, everybody. Me and my friend, we are from Faculty of Mining and Geology in Belgrade. Thank you for beautiful day. We have heard today about a lot of clean technologies, so which we can use to make clean cities and clean country. So my question is the money only reason why we don't have a clean cities and clean country yet? Thank you.
Is that for me?
Yes.
No. I think the short answer to that question is no, of course not. I mean, you hear plenty of stories about how there's money available, there's funding available, and it doesn't get taken up. And I think we need to ask ourselves why that is. One question, one point I think is that we are still at a fairly early stage of this. So for a long time, we've built up an energy system based on fossil fuels. And let's be honest, there's a lot to like about fossil fuels. They've become deeply unfashionable, and for good reason, because the more we understand about the climate crisis, the more we know that we cannot continue to depend on them. But for a long time, they've provided us with easy, accessible, easy to store, flexible energy. And so moving away from that system, it's a bit like trying to get a Titanic to change direction. It takes time. And that's why when we talk about the energy transition, we talk about 2030, we talk about 2050. It simply isn't something that can happen overnight. It's big infrastructure, it's planning, and I don't think that we yet really have a total societal consensus about the need to act with speed. I mean, I know in my various home countries, whether it's Belgium or the UK, we're not really close to that yet. There is a general sense that climate change is important and probably something should be done, but I don't see yet a huge willingness from the voters to put up with too much inconvenience, too much change. So I think we're at an early stage of this process, and it is my hope that things begin to hurry up. The other thing is capacity. Even when money is available, I hear all the time from local and regional authorities that they don't have the human resources capacity or the technical capacity to take it up. And that's why I think organizations like IRENA and the work that they're doing are so important.
Thank you very much, Paul. There's one more question, Professor Gabrilut.
In that several hundred pages manual you spoke about, have you come across any demo pilot binding together combined cogeneration, geothermal heat pumps, and district heating? If not, could you hint me somewhere where I could find something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've found lots of projects combining cogeneration and district heating, lots of projects combining geothermal and district heating. Whether I've seen any with all three in the same place at the same time, I'm not entirely sure, but it's a long booklet. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I'll point to Copenhagen, but we'll discuss that anyway. There is one more question here, the gentleman on the right, please. The floor is yours.
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Vladimir. I'm from Belarus, and you mentioned a project in Latvia and a power plant of 15 megawatts capacity. And I have a question. Does Latvia have a lot of sun to operate a 15 megawatt power plant? And what kind of technology was used on that plant? Because Belarus is even southern than Latvia, and we would be also interested in this technology.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, it's, you know, solar thermal is a funny thing. As far as I'm aware, the leading market in Europe for the development of solar thermal district heating is Denmark. And having spent quite a lot of time in Denmark, I can tell you that they are not overburdened with sunshine. And yet it works. So you know, even when you don't have a day of bright sunshine, you do have a lot of ambient light, and they are able to use this. So I mean, I've seen a large, huge solar thermal plant in Silkeborg in Denmark, and it's never sunny in Silkeborg, and it works. I can tell you exactly nothing about the precise nature of the panels used on this project in Silopsis in Latvia, but these are technical details I can get to you. It definitely works, and I do not think that it works because Latvia is such an exceptionally sunny country. So I don't see why at all the same thing wouldn't be possible in Belarus.
Any more questions? Otherwise, we really thank you very much indeed, Paul, for your insights. And we'll go to the next session.